Thank you so much for joining us today. For those who've recently joined, my name is Caitlin Studdert. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at ADAPTOVATE. It's an absolute joy to be with you today to discuss objectives and key results, also known as OKRs, specifically for leadership and how leaders should translate company purpose into action. Before we commence, some housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded. We welcome and encourage you to ask questions via the chat function. We've allocated 60 minutes for today's webinar. We'll have a 45-minute presentation, and then, as discussed, we would encourage and welcome you to participate with questions using the chat function. So, our agenda. We're going to introduce you to OKRs, then conduct an interactive OKR exercise with Paul's guidance and have time for questions. However, before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge that today I am here on the Eora Nation land. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land on which we all meet today. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm here on the traditional lands of the Eora Nation, and my colleague Paul McNamara is speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. Let's commence by introducing you to who we are. ADAPTOVATE helps organisations scale businesses with their business agility and transformation. We were founded in 2017. We're very proud today to have over 140 staff located across 9 offices. Our growth has been extraordinary, given that we have had the wonderful opportunity to speak and work alongside amazing teams in the following 5 practice areas. We focus on business agility, consulting and training. We also help organisations scale agile operating models. We support teams as they accelerate their business design and increase their speed to market. We help them improve delivery systems and scale. And importantly, what we're speaking about today is we support teams as they align their strategy with work done in teams. So before we commence, let's get to know you. We're going to use an interactive poll to understand your understanding of objectives and key results, and where your team is at currently with this concept that we're here to discuss today. The poll will come up on your screen, and we encourage you to participate so that we can all see our own level of understanding. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. It's fantastic to get to know you. Now that we know exactly what brings you here today and what you're here to learn and your level of interaction with OKRs, it's my opportunity to introduce you to Paul McNamara, who's here to guide our understanding. Paul is one of the co-founders of ADAPTOVATE and has worked with objectives and key results across many companies around the world. Paul spent 6 years at the Boston Consulting Group, leading the enterprise agile practice, and is still a senior advisor at BCG. Paul has led startups using OKRs, particularly when he was Chief Financial Officer at Simple. Paul is currently Head of Transformations at Woolworths Group, leading their rollout of their OKRs across over 200,000 team members. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks everyone for joining today. Thought I might go through a bit of an overview of why we use OKRs and where they came from. And if you think OKRs are not new, they've been around for sort of 50, 60 years, and they have driven some of the world's most successful companies in times of great change. And I don't think anyone can argue that we're not in a time of great change. Just to give you a bit of history, I mean, they sort of became famous around the sort of the 70s, 60s and 70s, where Intel was going through a big disruption with the microprocessor industry. They used OKRs to get them through that and look at the company they've become. Google as well, in the early 2000s, when there was huge disruption in the technology industry, they used OKRs to focus. And more recently, you can see on the right there's many companies across many industries that use OKRs. They're really designed to use that focus in times when things are moving so fast and you have to relentlessly focus on the most important things, which you'll hear a bit of a theme today. So why are they so beneficial? They clarify the approach, especially typically you do them on a quarterly basis. They clarify the objectives for the quarter, so they focus that effort on the things that are most important. It's sort of that, at the end of the quarter or halfway through the quarter when you haven't got everything done, which are the things you double down on to make sure you achieve. They create transparency so everyone knows that we're working on the most important things. And lastly, they measure impact. They've got a data-driven grading that enables us to measure that impact throughout the quarter and throughout the life of the objective to make sure we're heading in the right direction. So overall, what are OKRs? There's two parts to them. One's the objective, the O, and the key result, the KR. The objective is what we want to achieve, the goal. And that objective can be 3, 6, or 12 months long objective. Objectives are action-orientated, they're tangible, they're ambitious, inspirational, and you can typically set them on an annually basis or quarterly. And key results are the measure that we can tick off that give us confidence that we're progressing towards our objectives. Ideally, if you're doing them quarterly, they should be achieved within the quarter. You need to be able to check them off at the end of the quarter. They clearly make the objective achievable. We've all typically heard of SMART goals, so try to follow best practices there. And the way I look at it is think of it as a checkbox. You need to be able to tick it off, which means that leads to data-driven grading. And so let's go through a quick example for those that are new. I know there was not many that said before they were new, but a quick one here might be a personal OKR. I'm committing my objective. Aspirational objective is to spend more time with my family in 2023. How do I measure success on that? I measure success by, am I getting home for dinner by 6 p.m. 15 nights a month? I'm less distracted when spending time with my family by limiting screen time after 6 p.m. to 2 nights a week. I do family activities at least once a fortnight, and I hold a family outing once a month. I can sort of go through and understand these are the measures that we all agree and we all align on that are important to spend time as a family together. The one big question I get a lot, and I thought I'd cover this one up front, is around how do OKRs work with KPIs and other metrics in the business. And so you need both of them. And so typically most organizations would have a scorecard or a set of KPIs that drive the business, the numbers that make sure the business is running successful. And the way we look at OKRs is OKRs are the way you focus on which ones of those metrics are the ones which you want to drive a step change on for the quarter or for the time period you're looking at. And it won't be all of them. And so the best way to start with your key results is actually to look up your list of KPIs and use those as a starting point for your objectives and key results. Because number one, they're typically used to drive the business, so they're sort of understood across the business. And secondly, they're measured already. So it's an easy way to get started because you don't have to set up new measurement techniques. And the way I look at it, you always want to improve on your KPIs and measures across the business. So they should be that continual improvement. But the ones you want to make a step change on, they're the ones you highlight for the OKR for the quarter. And it won't be all of them. It needs to be a subset. So I think the best way to get into OKRs is actually to start going through them and writing them. So I thought we'd go through a bit of an interactive exercise. But before we do, just trying to understand some of the challenges that you have with OKRs today. And so we're going to open a quick poll, which hopefully give a bit of insight into questions that I can answer. So a good mix of responses here. We're confused with how they fit in with other methodologies. That's a really common one. We have way too many. I'll try and cover some of that. There are a list of deliverables. Great, that seems to be a big one as well. And the last two, less so, which is interesting, as in we think they're still the most important priorities, which sort of highlights that they might be sort of a bit of a top-down, which is great. And so seems to be that we are aligning most of you across the organisation. So let's maybe answer some of those very specifically and some of the principles that I like to use when you're getting started with OKRs. So strive to the top 5 objectives with 3 to 5 key results each. So try to keep to 5. Objectives setting should be 40% bottom up with 60% top down. They should be a stretch. 70% overall should be the goal, and that's a strong performance. You cannot link them to individual and team performance. If you do, it becomes really hard to make them aspirational. And avoid metrics that take a long time to change. Often NPS for most organizations is a sort of a 6 to 9 month change. If you have that every quarter and you're expecting it to change, you're not really having a good view of, are you making progress? And you need to sequence your OKRs, have an OKR roadmap, which gives you that overall view of not just where you're heading now, but where you're heading throughout the year as well. And for those that may have read the book, John Doerr's Measure What Matters book, they might see that some of these are slightly wrong. They'll say 3 to 5 objectives, but in large organizations, especially when you're starting, 3, most leaders will say that's impossible, cannot get 3. If I say 5, most leaders will say, okay, I've got 10. If I say 5, 10, but if I say 10, they'll give me 20. So I typically start around 5, which means you tend to get somewhere between 10 or so when you start. And then over the quarters you go, you tend to get 8 and then down to sort of that 5 to 8 measure for sort of at a top level of an organization, where most executives tend to land in an organization that has many different areas across the business. If it's a very single business line organization, you can sort of get to 5, but when there's multiple, it tends to get somewhere between 5 to 8. The other thing you'll notice is the book will say 60% bottom up, 40% top down. When you first start, bottom up planning in organizations is usually not the problem. It's usually that top down alignment. So I try to get people to focus more on the top down when you first start. And it's not top down as in micromanagement. It's top down as in alignment. Top down on what you want to achieve rather than how you're going to achieve it. And that may be the question that a few of you are facing around. They're just a list of major deliverables. The biggest mistake I see when people first start with this is just copying and pasting the Gantt chart into the OKRs. So if I go down and now play some of those through with the personal OKR we talked about before. So, is this inspirational? Spend more time with the family. Well, it might be good, but is more time the right measure? Or how do we think about quality time? Or some other things to think about the objective, not just spending more time, but what's the outcome you want to achieve? So that might be something you want to think about. Is it measurable getting home by 6 p.m. 15 nights a month? Yep, that's pretty good. I can tick that one off if I've done it or not. And throughout the quarter, I can show progress towards that. If I'm halfway through the quarter and I'm at 0, that means I'm in a bit of trouble to hit that target by the end of the quarter. The other thing is it specific, right? Be less distracted by limiting screen time. Does that screen time mean TV? Does it mean phones? What does screen time mean in your family? Do family activities once a fortnight? So that's great, and hold a family outing once a month. Is it specific enough? Could I use one of those family activities as an outing, for example? Or spending time with the family at night by being less distractive, is that an activity as well? So there's questions you can ask as you go through these to make sure that we're sort of clear. So is an activity having a conversation over dinner? Yes or no? I don't know. is an activity, scissors, paper, rock with your son? Tick it off, right? So there's a question around how do you measure these and what does it mean to be complete? So that might give you a top level overview. And some of the lessons that I've sort of focused on helping organizations overcome is the first one is around, yes, they should be aspirational. And the way to make them aspirational is typically have them spanning multiple quarters. So you might have the O based off your annual plan that is the big objective for the year. But the key thing is those key results must be, what are you delivering this quarter, which gives you confidence that you're going to hit that overall objective. It also helps reduce some of the, especially when you're starting, some of the, let's say, admin overhead of every quarter rewriting your OKRs from scratch again. Be careful with too many binary key results, the ones that are all or nothing. Because when you're first starting, if you get through the quarter and most of them you can't score because they haven't been fully achieved, it's not very motivating for teams to sort of continue on. And that seems a bit of a downer, for example. So there are going to be some delivery-based key results early on. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have them, and there's obviously a mix as you start, but try not to make all of them those binary key results. We'll get into a little bit later, but often we try to work on a QBR memo as well, which explains the why, the context around the objective first, which helps you keep your OKRs really crisp and concise and less wordy and less buzzwords as well. You know, be clear on the capacity for run the business. So a lot of people focus on your OKRs as the big change initiatives, but that's not all the capacity we have in the organization. There's a level of running the business as well that you have to keep in to check and be deliberate if these are in your OKRs or not. Some people like to include them, some people don't. You know, be ambitious on the target of the key result, not the number. A lot of leaders think, yeah, we're being ambitious. I've got 10 OKRs. Exciting. That's ambitious. That's what we're trying to get to, is not ambitious on the number of OKRs or the number of key results, ambitious on the value we're trying to achieve. And lastly, as you scale and continue out, you're going to need to find efficient ways to run this process. And there are tools out there that you can use to help make this a little bit more efficient. But obviously, I always recommend just start getting with writing it on a bit of paper and getting going. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the tips I found when first starting with OKRs. So now we're going to get into a bit of an interactive exercise around what do we think? You know, if we've written these OKRs, how do we know if they're good or not? So the first one is growing the company's online digital presence. And how am I going to measure that? Increase the number of weekly visitors using the app, increase the number of app users to 1 million, and increase online sales in 6 months. So what do we think? Is this a good OKR? Great. So the objective, is it action orientated? Is it tangible? Not many people think it is. Is it ambitious? That sounds good. Is the key results measurable? Are they understandable? And nobody thought they were specific enough. So let's go through maybe an example of what this could look like to make it better. So if we increase the number of weekly app users to 400,000, right? So on the next slide. Yep, on the next slide. So that might be a better way of saying I can measure that better. Because when I said increase the number of weekly active app users, if I get one more, is that success? So you might actually say a more specific number there. Then the second key result, if you remember, was number of users to 1 million. Is that the same measure as active weekly app users, or is it a different measure? And so this one's saying this one might be an OKR for 6 months. So in quarter one, we need to 400. By the end of 6 months, we need 1 million. And increased sales, is sales the real measure we want? Or it might be the sales mix to 40% across different parts of their product mix. So there's ways to think about having a conversation around, are these the most important things? So let's go to the next one. Let's say we want to strengthen our existing portfolio by amplifying value, quality, and especially at the moment, increasing supply security. So we want 128 new product development on shelf, generating $115 million in sales, 27 new packaging design launched and on shelf, and 0 out of stocks for Q1 through 43 negotiations completed and 2 new buyers onboarded. So what do we think? Take a look. Is it action orientated? Yes, we think so. It's pretty ambitious. Great. Is it measurable? I think most people think it's measurable. That's great. Understandable. There's probably a few buzzwords in there, or lingo that you need to be in this specific industry know it. And are they specific enough? So let's have a look at through those. Yes, I think everyone agrees they're measurable, right? There's 128 new products. There's we can tick off the number of sales. There's one question I always ask when I see numbers, like very specific numbers like 128, 115, 27. I always ask, is that your project plan? There was a feedback before that it's just my project plan copied and pasted. Are these the numbers straight off the project plan, and therefore are they aspirational? So it's always a question I ask. But that may not be the case, right? 128 might be what we said, they're our new product lines that are in the segment that we want to focus on to generate $115 million of sales. So that it might be all of them. So that might be quite ambitious for us. So there's a bit of context you need to understand here. And the last one is around the understandable bit. I'd always ask, so if I receive 0 out of stocks, but I don't get 43 negotiations, I do 35. Is that bad? Did I fail? So it's a good question to say, when you have multiple, let's say, measures in the one key result, do I really need, is the 43 negotiations and 2 buys, is that the how we're going to achieve the 0% out of stocks, or is that actually what we want to achieve? It might be what we want to achieve. It might be that actually, if we don't achieve these 43 negotiations now, next quarter, we're going to be really bad. So then let's be really clear on what's the most important thing you really need to get out of this one. Great. So let's go to the next one, which is a longer term OKR. The question I often get was, yeah, but I don't need OKRs because I'm not in digital technology. I'm not launching stuff every quarter. So this is a good example. This is a multi-year project. We need to construct a large warehouse locker in the Sydney area. That's the objective. So the key results for this quarter, we need DA approval by December. We need to sign up our 6 construction partners, and we get quote from 12 designers, and 4 of those construction companies we need to get quotes from. So what do we think? Is this a good OKR? Action-orientated, tangible, and time-bound. So 50% of you think that's the case. So it might be that it's action-orientated, we're going to build one, but when do we need to build it by? Right? When does it need to be in operation? Is construction the most relevant bit of the warehouse, or is it actually get a warehouse in operation? And that might be the mix between why we're questioning the objective as well. The measurability. Can I tick all of these? Can I get a DA? Can I have a DA in my DA approval? Yeah, I can tick that off. 6, there's 6 construction partners. Yep, I can measure that. And I've got quotes. Yep, 12 quotes. 4, I think I can tick them off quite easily, right? So I think they're very easily measurable. My question on these ones is, are they specific enough? When we say sign up construction partners, what does sign up actually mean? Does it mean we've completed due diligence and financial checks on them? Have we checked their references? Have we signed a bit of paper, or are we just saying, yeah, there are 6 construction partners? So what does What does sign up in this case actually mean? And we get final quotes. Somebody say, for what? Are we for the whole thing, for parts of it? Do we need to have interim quotes? What does a final quote actually mean? And so some of those things here is that understandable, specific enough. You're going to need to have a conversation around what do you mean by that? Great. And the other one was sort of talking about when you say DA, including parts of the location, design of the building, structural. Are you specifying the how too much on this? How you want or the scope of it? Or are those components really important? They're the ones I need for now. That's the DA I need for now. If you get more, that's great, but these are the components I need to get the DA approved on now. I might be able to put another amendment in later on for something else. Again, it's a bit more around the conversation. And the last one. Great, action-orientated. It looks ambitious, great. Questions on the measurability, understandability, and specific. So I didn't do a good job on the specific side of this one, I think, from everyone's view. So if I look at the objective itself, there is some buzzwords in here like activate. So what does activate actually mean? If you're not in marketing, probably have no idea what that means. And it's sort of, so there's a balance here you've got to get right between having no sort of industry standard words versus expanding them all out and having really wordy objectives. And so you've got to think about the audience. If everyone's sort of aware and in marketing, it might be okay to have activate the sustainability campaign across Australia, right? But if I need to get a more broader view of this, you might need to understand, well, what does activate actually mean? There's a question on some of the key results. So I would argue on some of these, develop the sustainability brand strategy and scorecards. Are they the outcome, the measure you really want to measure? Or is that, like you were voting before, is that your marketing campaign plan copied and pasted into a key result? So especially on the first two, are they the how you're going to achieve it? So you need to think about what might be a better measure. So if I think brand strategy, communications, brand enablement, what am I actually trying to achieve here? This is getting the campaign strategy all going. So typically, the one measure that you're really excited about, that you're able to launch a campaign, is either the brief is signed off or the campaign is funded. You've got funding approval for that brief. So you might think about combining A and B into get funding approval for the brand strategy campaign, or brief signed off by the CMO, for example. So you can reduce some of the words and reduce that laundry list of deliverables into what do you actually care about? I actually care about I get funding for it, or the CMO signs off on it, or the chief sustainability officer signs off on it. When we talk about launch the sustainability campaign via social media with an engagement score of 11%. So if I launch it and I get an engagement score of 50%, but not in social media, I put a TV ad out there and get an amazing engagement score. Is that a failure? Well, according to this, yes, because the social media was 11, but the other, or in-store or TV, was amazing. And so this question becomes, am I being too specific here? Do I really care if it's the social media? Because that might be the channel that audience that I'm trying to get doesn't interact with. Or I might actually be saying, look, no, I really need social media. The last 4 campaigns we've launched, we have been hopeless at social media. Therefore, I really want us to focus on our social media engagement here because it's a part of the market we're really missing. So for me, social media is super important. And again, on the last one, 7.5 million consumers. through traditional advertising, television, or out of home. Same thing. If I reach 15 million consumers through a massive viral TikTok campaign, is that success or failure? Well, according to this, that's failure. So what am I going through? Am I going through eyeballs and how many people have seen this campaign? i.e. the reach is the most important thing? Or similar to before, is it, no, look, the last TV advertising, television, out of home campaign we run was hopeless. We didn't do very well at it. So we really need to make sure we get return on investment from that channel. And so based on the budget we put forward for it, if we don't hit 7.5 million consumers, then we're not getting our return on investment from that channel. And hopefully by this discussion, you will see that in the first three key results, OKRs, that we went through, it was more about the process. Have you ticked off the box around, is it measurable? Is it sustainable? Is it understandable? Is it smart objectives? Is it aspirational, etc.? So there's a process component of OKRs. Yes, you have to get those right. But when I'm starting, I often don't be too strict on all those. The goal when you first start is just to start writing it down. But stage one is tick the process checkboxes. Stage two of this, which I think is the most important, is having the conversation. I may have the perfect written OKRs, ticks all the boxes. However, are they the right key results? Are they driving the right thing that I actually want to achieve? And so often, it's not just your key result that can specify this. Or like we saw before in some of the thing, we get a really, really wordy OKR that has to last a paragraph long. So what I always recommend, setting context for these OKRs is, I think, the most important thing, more important than getting the checkboxes going. So we typically would have these OKRs in a memo style document where you'd have a paragraph above the OKR setting the context, which would, in this case, would say, the sustainability campaign's really important to get into market because our competitors are in market already. So in this case here, I get it. This objective is right. It's about getting it in market, not necessarily first up about achieving the best results possible. It's about time to market. Got it. So now I understand why this objective makes sense. Because before, activate. Well, is that actually achieving anything? Does it matter? Well, actually, it might be that getting it in market first is the most important thing. Great. So I've said that. And then I might say, like I sort of said before, we really need to improve on our social media engagement. We're missing that part of the segment. So I really want early on to focus on that social media. Similar, I'll say the same context I had about the last one as well. So hopefully that gives you a sense, which sort of leads into the process around OKRs, which I think are just as much important. And if you read John Doerr's book, the thing he talks about a lot is OKRs are a way to have a conversation. It's the most important part of an OKR is having the conversation around it. So typically what we would implement is a strong annual planning cycle, which sets the O's typically for the year. and what are the measures of success, the sort of the sense of the business case of what we're trying to achieve. And then throughout the quarter, we go through a quarterly cycle where we have our business review, where we all align on what are the priorities for the quarter. That's where we talk about our OKRs. Typically put them in a memo format, which has the context. This is why it's so important, and this is what we want to achieve. So hopefully out of the business review, everyone's clear on why it's so important and what. So the OKR describes the what, the narrative a bit above it describes the why. Then we go into plan and align, which is most people typically use some form of big room planning style exercise here. This is where the how comes into it. So we've got the what and the why in the business review, and we ask the teams how they're going to achieve this. And this is where, as you're writing OKRs, you're going to get great feedback from your teams. saying you're being too specific in your OKR, you're specifying the how, not just the what. Then, because we're not perfect and there's still going to be prioritization questions or things we can't achieve, we come back in to refine and approve, which we typically have a quarterly investment council, which says, were there any, you thought the OKRs were the ones you wanted in the business review. The team said, actually, no, you're kidding. I can only achieve these, or you've got a trade-off between A or B. So we come back, we make those sort of final trade-offs across the group. And then lastly, we align our resources behind it. Do we have the funding? Do we have the people behind it? Then throughout the quarter, we would measure. Midway through the quarter, I think it's a great time to measure, the check-in on these OKRs, because it gives us enough time, the 7 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks throughout a quarter, to say, I've delivered enough so I can actually check some of them off. And then I've got enough time to change priorities or move things around to make sure I deliver the most important ones if I'm not delivering all of them. And that's sort of the key bit here. Some people do them monthly. I think it's too soon, because often within the first month, you haven't delivered enough to check anything off, and it demoralizes the team. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're trying to achieve is a process around the OKRs to facilitate the right conversation on the right topic at the right time. So maybe we can hit into a bit of Q&A.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paul. That was a fantastic overview, and I loved the interactivity. We're delighted to have some questions through the Q&A channel, and we would welcome more questions in that function. One of the first questions we have, Paul, is an excellent one, all about ambition. So the question from Yasmin, thank you, Yasmin, for asking this question in the forum today, is that your understanding is that OKRs are positioned to be ambitious, and 70% is a great goal to have. But the question for you, Paul, is, in your experience, what happens if the org or the organisation is not aligned culturally to support this? For example, Yasmin's mentioned, what if there's a fear of failure or not meeting targets? How do you guide leaders, Paul, in understanding that aspirational goal, but the realism of perhaps only meeting 70% of that goal or target?
No, it's a common question. And I think my main answer is not all of this stuff you're never going to get done in your first time through OKRs. Typically, if you put it in a quarterly cycle, I say that it takes about 6 to 8 cycles to really embed this in an organization. So you're not going to change the culture overnight. And there's sort of a bit of a spectrum here, right? If you're a sales-driven organization, this can be really hard because quotas and everything else are driven. Dollars, bonuses are driven based on hitting targets. If you're a product style organization, tends to be a little bit easier. You tend to get it earlier in that process. But there's many things you need to do. Number one, the most important one is you need to divorce it from the performance management targets. So most people think, a lot of senior executives, when they first say, oh, great, I've got a way to measure now. Quick, make sure your OKRs are in your plan for the year and your performance plan. Because now I've got a way to finally measure you. That is the recipe for success to never achieving what you've raised. You need to separate them. And it's one of the big things that we push early on. It's very easy for executives, oh, this is great, to put them in because now I've got to measure because I never had a measure before. So keep your measures, your performance plan, and the OKRs need to be an input. So you have a discussion. Yeah, look, I delivered all these amazing things. That's number one. The second thing is, if you set up your OKRs objective, it's not each key result. The one thing often people make mistakes, it's not each key result needs to be hit at 70%. It's overall for the objectives. So it becomes really important in this business review, when you're summing up for the end of the quarter, to talk about, look, yeah, we hit 70%. This is great. We overachieved on one of these. We hit them on over the 70% on one or two of these key results, but we slightly were behind on the others. but overall, great outcome, right? And so it's a lot around how you start facilitating that business review, which is the look back as well as the look forward. That's the second one. And the third one is find parts of the organization where you can start trialing this and sort of, let's say, line it up in the background that you have those conversations around, yeah, that's great that you did this, and it is ambitious. And look, you're going to need part of the role, myself and the team play in a lot of these, when people call out, oh, but you didn't achieve that, is to remind people, to use that coaching, constant coaching to remind people, oh, that's right, it's 70%. But the key thing is, if you don't have sort of CEO buy-in, that's the culture you want to build, and that ambitious striving bit, then it's going to be pretty hard. But what I found actually, most organizations, especially at the exco level, and especially if you're publicly listed, you'll probably have this, is you will have a set of KPIs and you'll have stretch targets in a lot of the performance plans. So often you can replace, you can use some of that stretch target concept in your OKRs as well. So hopefully that gives a bit of a sense, but there's no silver bullet to doing this. It takes time, as in any cultural change.
Thanks, Paul. It's so wonderful to have your guidance. You mentioned that you think that OKRs should be teamed with context. So the example you gave is a paragraph that provides that context, that's often written in narrative form, not simply a cut and paste. In your experience, how tricky is that for leaders when they first start to write in that narrative form, such as a QBR memo? And how do you guide them when they're first starting?
No, very, very good question, that one, because not many people are used to writing since high school. And so I often get the feedback from leaders I work with, it's reminding me going back to school again, having to write an essay. And so often when I start with this, I don't get leaders to write it down. And because they're just not used to it. But what leaders are typically very good at is articulating why things are so important. And with a couple of questions, you can really tease it out from them quite quickly. So it may sound pretty simple, but I often see myself as a glorified stenographer. Whatever you say, I just start writing it down. And I will write the first time through it, I will write it for them. You just speak, concentrate on what's important, and I'll just dictate it for them. So often the first time I will write it for leaders. And then once you've got a set of good examples that are in the context of that organization, using the language of that organization is pretty important too. Then people just tend to copy from it as you go. So that's and people say, oh, especially if you've got an annual objective, the context throughout each quarter doesn't change significant. So when you write it at the beginning of the year, I've written it once for them, it's a really good narrative, small, short paragraph. Throughout the quarter, it's just a slight change of it. Like this quarter, we've done social media. Let's just change from social media to brochures or something else. So it tends to be it's easier to change and edit it rather than write it from scratch as you go through. Then throughout the year, they've made small changes. They have much more confidence the next year just to go do it themselves and rewrite it themselves.
That's wonderful, Paul. And I've also seen when you've guided leaders to stay away from acronyms, for example, because you've mentioned that it's so hard for the reader to absorb the acronym if they don't understand what it stands for, let alone the objective or the target. So that's wonderful insight. One of the other questions that one of our guests has asked is, when you don't meet the objective or the key result, how soon do you need to realign within the organisation, and how swiftly do you need to recognise you may not get there, and how do leaders realign at that point?
Yeah, you've got to find the right balance between shifting too quickly and trusting your strategy. And this is where, if you write your OKRs well, they're measures of outcomes, right? And so why we sort of design the process in midway through the quarter, 6 weeks, every 6 weeks you have some sort of check-in. You typically don't change your OKRs throughout the middle of the quarter, but what you might do is, if something's not working, pivot those resources to make sure that the things at the top of the list that may not be hitting the mark, you're really nailing the most important ones. But let's say your most important one's not achieving. Well, that's sort of a question, right? Halfway through, after 6 weeks, to throw a key part of your strategy out just after 6 weeks worth of trying, typically test and learn and try again, right? So typically throughout the quarter, you wouldn't rip up and throw away your OKRs, because it sort of gives you enough time to really test, have you given it a go? Then that's why you have the business review. You test back. Well, are we achieving the objective? Is the objective changed? Is the first question I ask. Well, no, the objective hasn't changed. It's still our strategy. Okay. If we're not hitting that measure, is that the right measure? So we might be doing the right stuff, but we might be measuring the wrong thing. So let's have that conversation in the business review. Let's get that cross-functional leaders together to actually have that conversation. Right? If it is the right strategy and it is the right measure, but we're just not working, that's a strategy question. That's not an OKR question to sort of use OKRs to solve that problem. You go back and you say, well, let's rethink our strategy. Is our strategy right? Let's do maybe more customer research, etc. And then the next quarter, we might bring in a new OKR based on an updated strategy. And typically it's not throw away your whole strategy, it's one small part of it. So focus on something else for that quarter while the strategy team's going off and finding a refresh. Because the best thing about the quarterly cycle is it doesn't mean that what we're not doing this quarter is not important. Let's say it's the social media one. Let's not launch any social media campaigns this quarter. Doesn't mean that we're never going to do it again, but just for this quarter, we're going to focus on out of home and other channels. And then maybe next quarter, we'll refocus on social if that's the strategy says that's the right thing. So this is where the balance when you're writing OKRs between strategy, execution, financial, and people and capacity are really important to get that right end to end and have those right discussions between all of those key people in this process.
Paul, thank you. We've had a number of people ask on the Q&A, just for you to repeat for us your great guidance on the difference between objectives and key results and KPIs. It comes up so often, and you had a slide that described it.
Yeah, and this slide's probably a good one to talk through it as well. So I talked through before around you need your metrics that drive the business. They're the ones that typically people are measured on, right? They're the ones that that your bonuses and everything else and the ones that run how you run your business is based on. So that's the list of KPIs. That's a long list.
Back to your screen here.
Yeah, that's typically a long list and really hard to focus on. And often people will say, "Oh, let's get our hero KPIs. Let's reduce it down to the ones that matter." And in my experience, you may be much better than me. I've never seen an organization be able to do that properly, because getting rid of some of these things that are really important to parts of the business says, like, I need to run my business. I go bankrupt if I don't have some of those, right? So getting this down to a short list of that's 3 to 5 things to focus on, to me, never works. So you can have that longer list, but these are the ones that drive the business. And then you pick your OKRs, you pick which one of those you want to write as OKRs, either for that quarter or for that year. If it might be for the year, actually, we need to focus for the next year on acquisition. So new customers is the real KPI that we're driving to. We want to make sure profitability stays at a reasonable level. It can't drop off the cliff, but we don't need to improve in profitability for this year. New customers is the focus. But if I don't have that profitability measure as my key result, that profitability could go way off the charts the wrong way and be a big issue. We're acquiring customers at the expense of, we're essentially paying for customer acquisition, which is not what we want. So you need the key KPIs to keep a focus on what's important across the organization. And the OKRs help us give focus on which ones we want to make a step change. The other way I sort of think about it is, if you think an improvement chart, continuous improvement is that on all your KPIs, and the OKRs are the ones you want to give a step change on this. And it's really important throughout that cycle is to have a check-in. I highly recommend monthly check-ins on your KPIs to make sure the OKRs aren't making you focus on the big shiny stuff and forgetting some of the key, usually profitability metrics that keep the lights on and pay the bills and keep you in a job.
Thank you, Paul. It's been so wonderful to hear your insights today with such experience and great guidance. Thank you to all our participants for joining us. We would encourage you to contact us and speak directly with Paul for any further questions about objectives and key results. You'll see here on our socials that we have listed on the page that we are consistently updating our content and material to guide you into how to create that business agility within your firm. We will be sending the on-demand materials to you in the coming days via email, and we would welcome your feedback about our webinar today and look forward to speaking with you to guide your business to the future. Thank you all for your participation today.